everyone, and welcome to our CFRC workshop titled Conducting Broadcast News Interviews. My name is Alexandra Fernandes, and I am the Community News Coordinator for CFRC. Present today, we also have some of our other lovely staff members. We have Sylvia, and I think Dean is also on the call. Do you mind, guys, just hopping on and introducing yourselves for us?
Sure. Hi, I am Silvia Bejar. I am the Multicultural Programming Coordinator here at CFRC. So hi, everyone.
Awesome. And Dean, do you want to go ahead? Oh, you're on mute, I think.
Maybe he's not in having technical difficulties because that's what happens sometimes in radio.
Yes.
Dean is here in person and he's there. My name is Dinah Jansen. I'm the station manager. Pleasure to see so many folks turning out today. Thank you so much. Take it away, Alex.
Yeah, so we are so excited to have you all here virtually to attend this workshop. We really hope that you are able to learn something new from it and that you're able to develop your skills from this session. We have a special guest with us as well, Julie Brown, in attendance with us this evening, and she will be sharing her insight into the industry and jumping in with some tips and tricks for conducting broadcast news interviews. So maybe a little silent applause for Julie. Thank you so much for joining us. But yes, so yeah, let's get through it. And we're also very thankful to the Community Radio Fund of Canada for making this workshop possible for us to host. So
sorry, before we get started, can we just ask everyone to turn off their microphones, please?
So this is just a little bit of a breakdown of tonight's workshop and what it will look like. After our welcomes, we'll have a little talk with Julie after this introduction, and then we will jump into the guidelines and the step-by-step process for conducting interviews and what that will look like. So that way you folks can have an idea of how to successfully conduct an interview all the way from start to finish. We'll have some interactive activities during this time as well, so look forward to that. And to end, we will also have a Q&A with Julie as well, and I guess also more generally speaking to any of us staff members. So without further ado, let's welcome our guest, Julie Brown.
Thanks so much, Alexandra, and to Dinah. Happy to be here tonight, and so happy to see so many of you here tonight too. I know it's the eve of a long weekend. It's been a short but long week for many of us, so thank you for your interest and your time tonight. So I was just going to give a brief overview, sort of how I got to where I am today. And it starts with my journalism career. So I was a broadcast journalist for almost 20 years. I did my undergrad at the University of Toronto. I did my double major in history and sociology, but ever since I was a really small child, I always had a real interest in news. I grew up in a home where the radio was on in the morning, the television was on at night, the newspaper was delivered to the house. My parents were up on current affairs, and as a result, I think I was immersed in it. I was interested in finding out what's going on in my community and beyond. So when I was finishing up my final year at U of T, I was looking to see what I could do with my degree, and I was contemplating teachers college. And I was also looking at some postgraduate journalism programs. So I had to make a decision because I did get into OISE, so the U of T Teachers College, but in the end I decided to follow my dream, and I accepted a position or a space at Sheridan College in Oakville, and Sheridan had just started a postgraduate journalism program. So it was an intense one-year program that taught me everything I needed to know. It taught me how to shoot It gave us MacBooks, so we learned how to edit with a system called Final Cut Pro. We learned how to write for broadcast. We learned how to write for print. And at that time, the internet and all the online applications were just coming to the forefront. So we got a crash course on how to create websites and how to write for online publications. When I graduated from there, actually part of the program was an internship, and I ended up doing my internship at a local community TV station. I grew up in Scarborough, which is in Toronto's East End, and at the time, Scarborough had its own nightly newscast. So one of my professors was a reporter there as well, and so she took me under her wing, and I did my placement at Scarborough News, and it was a wonderful experience because Scarborough being part of Toronto, there was often a lot of stories that came out of Scarborough, but it also meant that major media was covering the stories as well. So it gave me an excellent experience to see what it was like to file a story and see how other publications covered the story. And it also gave me the idea of the competition and what a scrum was like and really what it takes to create a story and meet those deadlines. So it was fantastic. And once that internship was done, they hired me freelance, which was also amazing. So I could make some money doing what I was really enjoying doing. That freelance work allowed me to create a demo reel, which you need in order to apply for positions. And a couple months later, I was able to get a part-time job at a television station in Peterborough called Checks News. It's now known as Checks Peterborough, Global News Peterborough. And there I covered everything from municipal politics to human interest stories to crime. And I was what you would call a general assignment reporter. I was a videographer, which meant I carried a camera with me. And then I would come back and I would edit my story. I would write my story and I would edit my story. So we didn't have editors. We didn't have camera people. I was a Jill of all trades. And it was a smaller station, but if you showed the initiative, you had the opportunity to learn a bunch of skills. So I was trained on anchoring, I was trained on weather, I was trained on sports. So it was great. So I was there for almost 2 years. And then I was offered a position at CKWS Television, which is the Kingston TV station, also known as Global Kingston. And I was hired there in 2003. And I was hired to co-host a show at the time called Newswatch at 5:30. And I would do that Tuesday through Friday. And then on Saturday, I would work on the weekend show as a reporter. So kind of a nice mix of hosting and reporting. So I did that for a few months. And then the station was going through a bit of a change. Their 11 o'clock anchor had decided to pursue a career in law. So she was going to law school in the fall. And so they were looking for an 11 o'clock anchor. At the time, their 6 p.m. anchor was so low on the desk. There was only one 6 p.m. anchor, and they wanted to add a female presence to that. So a new position was formed, and it would be an anchor for the 6 p.m. and 11 p.m. news. And I was the successful candidate. And all my dreams had come true. It was the goal of a lifetime to be a news anchor. And I was so grateful and happy that my hard work had paid off. So I was the news anchor at CKWS for about over 10 years, almost 12 years. And then I had my first child. I went off for a year on maternity leave. And when I came back, they had created a noon show. CKWS News at Noon. So I became the anchor and producer of that show. And then a few months later, they decided they wanted to have a morning show. So they asked me if I would be willing to help launch a morning show on Global Kingston. And that is what I was doing until I left almost a year ago. We're actually coming up to the 1-year anniversary of my departure from broadcast journalism. So some of my favorite stories that I've covered include really community-based stories. That's the beauty of Kingston. We are a small town, but there is so much news that comes out of our city. And if any of you have been paying attention to news in the last little while, the story of a missing 3-year-old toddler made national news last night. So it was a local story that we all were invested in the community, but it was quite an extraordinary story, had a wonderful, wonderful ending. And I think it was the type of news that not just Kingston, not just Ontario, the entire country needed to hear at a time where we're hearing about COVID variants and vaccine rollouts and lockdowns. So it was pretty nice to see that our Kingston was shining in the national spotlight last night. It was such a fantastic story. Anyway, one of the stories I really enjoyed covering was the royal wedding of Prince William and Catherine Middleton. And no, I didn't get to go to England to cover it, unfortunately. I did pitch that idea. But what I did, because I was talking about it so much on the air every night, is that a viewer who lived in West End Kingston actually called me up and said, hey, I'm going to have a viewing party early in the morning to watch this. Would you like to come? And I thought this was going to be wonderful. So I borrowed a hat and a fascinator, and I went to Card's Bakery in downtown Kingston and got some yummy treats that we'd be able to enjoy while we were watching the wedding. And there were about 8 of us. And we watched and we had some mimosas and we just chatted, and it was amazing. It was a great way to connect with the viewers and celebrate what I considered to be a really wonderful event. And it seemed to really resonate with the community. People seem to remember my royal wedding stories, and they just thought it was a fun occasion that really the whole community could be a part of. So that was one of my favorites. Another favorite was I was fortunate to go to CFB Kingston and be a soldier for a day. So that was an opportunity to see what the Army, what the Navy, and what the Air Force was like. There's actually all three versions of the Canadian military operate out of CFB Kingston. So I was up in a Griffin helicopter, and I was on a dinghy in the St. Lawrence, and I was firing a rifle and firing a pistol, something that I was very afraid of. It really took me out of my comfort zone and made me realize sort of what the obstacles were and sort of what a day in the life was and what was expected of a Canadian military member. So grateful to be able to have some insight into what that was like. So I'll move on to my time at Queen's. So I came to Queen's April 13th, 2020. So just as the pandemic was unfolding. I have yet to work a day on the Queen's campus. So if any of you have some great ideas on like nice walking paths or a place that makes a really good coffee or wonderful sandwiches or a good deal on something, I'm all ears, because this is all new to me. I have been operating out of my desk, my office, since I started. So please send me those tips in the chat, or you can send me an email afterward. But anyway, I was hired as a media relations officer. And so that's part of the university relations portfolio. So I'm really in the central branch of the university. So I write news releases, I put out advisories, I look at the faculty members and take a look at the research that they're working on. And often they will communicate with me and let me know if they have a journal publication that's ready, or if they're doing some really neat research that they would like amplified. And I write this up and I pitch it to the media. And it may just be local media, but also it's been national media, it's been international media. I also, my news hat is always on, and I scour for news stories to see where our Queen's experts have been featured. You know, we have an infectious disease specialist by the name of Dr. Gerald Evans. Dr. Evans has worked tirelessly not only on the healthcare front, but he's also been a figurehead for the university in terms of talking about the variants and the vaccine rollout and what we need to do to stay safe. So fortunate to have Dr. Evans with us. So anyway, I look for experts, and again, it's an opportunity to pitch their expertise to the media and generate some interviews and excitement around the research that they're working on. I also do something called social listening. So I look at social media accounts, which I'm sure many of you know are, they've actually grown in popularity since the pandemic has started. So Twitter, Facebook, and more Instagram. Just taking a look at some of the interesting stories that are out there, some of the stories that Queen's is tagged in or certain researchers are tagged in, noteworthy things to keep an eye on. I also write stories for the Queen's Gazette. Many times it's something that I've taken a news release and turned it into a story that's featured on the Gazette, or it's a Q&A with one of our experts just to get a little bit more information out of the project that they're working on. I also provide media training to our faculty members because, as I'm sure you can appreciate, they are academics. They are so engrossed in their research, and it's so novel to them, but to be able to explain it in a conversational way to a journalist or someone else can be tricky. So I provide guidance and tips and tricks to make them feel comfortable, whether it's in front of the camera or it's over the web or it's being quoted in a newspaper or being featured in a radio story. So I give them some guidance and ideas on how to create the most successful interview as they can, and in turn raise their profile. Another interesting aspect of my job involves crisis communications. So if something goes wrong with the at the university, we are kind of pulled into action and come out with statements and information that we can provide the media or the concerned parties just to explain what's going on, what the university is doing. For example, when we had the recent outbreak, both on campus and off campus, I was involved in the crafting of the statements that were put out to the media to let the community know, as well as faculty and students and staff, know what was going on in terms of the outbreak and the health and safety measures that were being taken to keep everybody safe. Another thing I do is I pitch opinion pieces to newspapers. So many researchers write articles or they write essays on a specific topic that, again, they would like featured in certain newspapers, whether it's the Globe and Mail or the Toronto Star or the Ottawa Citizen. So they'll send me their essay and they ask me to proofread it, take a look at it. And then when it's how it needs to be, often it has to be shortened down, and it can only be about 750 words. Sometimes they're a little bit longer. So just work with them to do some editing, and then I pitch it to the respective newspapers and send them the link when it's placed. So that's always really exciting. And the last sort of piece that I've done in the last year is photo opportunities. So allowing media to come on campus for a variety of reasons. We've only done a few this year just to make sure everybody's safe. But two that I did in the summer, or I guess toward the end of the summer, was the roll-in of residents, where everyone was at Richardson Stadium and the first years were moving in, and it was all very organized in terms of who could be where at what time. And also a tour of the residence buildings. The media could see sort of what it was going to look like, what the resident landscape was going to look like during this pandemic year. And we also had a funding announcement just before Christmas time where an MPP came down to announce some funding for the university. So I suspect those types of opportunities will grow once the vaccine rollout has been fully implemented and we're all getting back to spending much more time on campus. So that is sort of my journey up until now. And were we going to open it up for Christmas or questions right now, Alexandra, or are we going to keep moving?
Yeah, if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand and ask away. You can either do it in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask Julie. Yeah, go ahead, Joel, either in the chat or you can unmute and ask away.
Hello, how are you?
Hi, Joel. I'm well, thanks.
That's awesome. I had a question about while you're interviewing somebody and you might notice they're sort of reading off a script and not being like very creative with their questions. What do you do? Do you throw like kind of a curveball at them, curveball question? What's kind of your approach to that?
Oh, well, you know, I often don't want to throw them under the bus, so to speak. Interviews are very unique. Sometimes you have people who are very engaged and excited and ready to tell their story, and others who do come with those cue cards and they want them close by, almost like a security blanket. Before the interview, I really try and reassure them to let them know sort of what the format of the interview was going to be like, what the general questions are going to be. I didn't generally send my questions ahead of time to them, but I did give them ideas of what I was going to be asking them, just so they could prepare themselves and kind of bring that anxiety level down. But often I would really encourage them not to have the papers in front of them, because in all honesty, they know what they're talking about. I think it's just those nerves attached with either being on camera or being on radio, or fear of being misquoted. So before I would confirm an interview, I would always kind of encourage them that and let them know, okay, this is the lay of the land, this is the topic. I'm not going to pull any fast ones. It's going to be a very conversational, friendly interview. Which are those the types of interviews you're doing right now, or are you doing more of a like looking for answers or digging a little bit deeper? Did we lose Joel?
I don't know.
Oh dear, maybe Joel will come back.
Oh, he's on mute. Joel, you're on mute.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
No, that's an awesome response. Yeah, just to have them be prepared. They're not as nervous. Yeah, I normally like to take that approach too. I always send the interviewee my questions beforehand, just in case. Also, if they want to maybe change up a question or add a question, in case, because I can't think of everything, right? It's more helpful because they know the information a lot better than I do. So if they have a question they'd like to add, I normally like to do that as well. So that's a great thing to do. Yeah, I definitely agree.
Okay, good. Okay, I guess Megan has her hand up. Hi, Megan.
Hi, thank you, Julie. I have a question about, I guess, how prepared you are when you go into an interview, because I find that I'll have my questions and I want to get through them, but I also really want to listen and then try to respond in the moment. But I really struggle with like the listening and responding and then asking my prepared questions and what I should do. So when you're in an interview, how prepared are you, I guess? And then how do you, I don't know, how do you have that natural flow?
Well, that is a great question. I'm really glad you brought it up. And it's very much a learned skill. Even people in the business right now struggle with that whole aspect of listening. And it's so key in an interview to listen to what your interviewee is saying. You can go into the interview, and I would always kind of study ahead of time to learn their background or get a handle on the topic or their area of expertise, or if it was a specific issue that I wanted to ask them about, mine them for information about. But at the end of the day, what I tried to do was really listen to their responses, because that creates the jumping off point to make that natural progression and create that natural dialogue. Because if you are holding on to your 10 questions and looking down at your paper or trying to remember what your next question is, you're not really listening to their response. And they could be saying something key that could trigger a question that might be 9 or 10 on your list. It may not be the next one, but it would be something you wanted answered anyway. So I'd say that active listening is so key in order to create that nice natural flow. And when they are done, and you feel that there is a break, then you can sort of almost shift gears and ask some of those questions that may not have been answered before. But I'd say really listen to their responses, because that will help generate the questions that ultimately you want to ask.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions for Julie? Or
I have a question. Dinah here. Nice. Thank you so much for what a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much, Julie. I'm interested more in hearing about what you were talking about vis-a-vis social listening. I'm wondering how you go about determining whether there's a story to chase when you see a social media post, or if it might be just somebody's opinion, or somebody, complaining about something that may not necessarily be a story at all? How do you determine what's a legitimate story and what isn't on social media?
Well, one of the things I look at is who is sharing the story. If it's somebody who has a lot of followers, then it could potentially carry a lot of weight because what they're saying is going across to thousands of people potentially. If it's someone who has 26 members or followers, the reach isn't that great. But when you see that many people are talking about the same thing and the sentiment seems to be the same, whether it's positive or negative, that's when we start to realize that there may be something there. And especially when we get tagged in things, it's easier to follow it. But even if you sort of do searches under the topic and see who's talking about it, but really, I'd say it has to do with who is engaging in the conversation in the first place and what their reach is. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
No problem.
We do have a question in the chat from Dean Hayden, our music coordinator. Hi, Julie. Sorry, his mic is acting up. His question is, how do you get someone who is giving you really short, undefined questions to open up, especially when you need to fill in the broadcast time?
Oh my goodness, what an excellent question. I have been there. Some people are so tough, and yeah, you struggle because you realize that you've got a minute to go and that minute feels like eternity. A minute doesn't feel that long when I'm late for something, but it sure feels long when you've got dead air to fill. So again, I think that's where taking the time ahead of the interview is really helpful to warm up to them and kind of chit chat to them just with some breezy conversation. It doesn't have to be anything controversial. It can be your typical Canadian statement of, oh, it's a beautiful day, or, do you have any plans for the weekend, or just something nice and breezy to kind of bring them down. And usually that helps to cut the ice a little bit and make them feel a little bit more comfortable. But sometimes you have to ask the question over and over again. If they're only giving you short answers, you can say, could you elaborate on that? Could you give me an example of that? Something like that might get them to say a few more than 3 words and help fill in the time. Does that make sense? You meant questions. You meant answers, not questions.
Yes.
Okay. It's a tough one. It's a tough one. We used to talk about that all the time, that sometimes it was a tough interview. Like some people just aren't very open. And then you sort of file it away for next time. You remember the good interviews, and then you remember interviews that didn't go so well. And often I would look back on those interviews and watch them again or listen to them again and see if there's any opportunity for me to change my approach for next time, or just lessons learned for potentially the next time I spoke to them. Anybody else?
Yes, I have a question, Sylvia here. So what's the best way to cut the people that is very talkative, that they speak and speak and speak, and you cannot say, hey, hold on, I need to go to the commercial break or something like that?
Yes. See, that's the other end of the spectrum. People who are chatty Cathys. And you know what? Sometimes you just have to cut them off. And I know that's a tough thing to do because they're taking their time and they're doing the interview with you. But, often I would say something like, thank you so much. Really interesting conversation. We have to leave it there. Thanks so much. And then you launch into how you're going to throw to your break, so to speak. But yeah, sometimes it would just be like, thank you. I'm sorry. I have to leave it there. Or yeah, just cut them off.
Yeah, it's true.
Try and do it in a polite way.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
No.
Okay, well, maybe more questions will come as the evening goes on.
Yes, for sure. So yeah, thank you so much, Julie, for that amazing talk about your kind of whole process and what everything was like from the beginning to where you are now with your career. It was really really insightful, and hopefully it was inspiring for some folks. I know it was for me. It was kind of cool to see like all the different roles that you've been able to take on, from stuff, you know, behind the scenes and directly reporting and stuff. So now we're going to jump into the workshop itself. We're going to go through the whole step-by-step process of conducting news interviews for broadcasting. And yeah, this will just ensure folks that you know what to do every step of the way, just to make sure that the whole experience is enjoyable, efficient, and smooth, because that is what is most important. So the first step is to, of course, conduct your research. The main questions during this part includes what will you be talking about and who will you be talking to about it. Some tips that we have for conducting research includes chasing leads. So as soon as you hear about a story, as soon as there's some buzz about something, whatever it may be, if it's something really big, something that can really grow and develop into something more, or maybe even something small, but you really find that there's potential and that it's something passionate to you and something of interest to you, chase it, go after it, see what you can find about it. And kind of tying into our next point, a good way to do that is by sourcing different stories and doing background research on what you want to interview about. So in terms of sourcing different stories, it's a good idea to look at several articles to get better insight. It's a really good idea to have different perspectives when you're doing this part, because you don't want to come at it from a biased point of view, and you want to make sure that you are covering the topic as a whole, which is really important. And also because it is news that is typically just the direction that we like to take it in. And yeah, doing your background research, whether that be looking at things on social media, things in different news articles, word of mouth, talking to people potentially involved, if appropriate, of course, and things like that. And then the next thing is to identify the subjects to actually interview. And that's kind of just figuring out the exact people that you will be interviewing, who's the most appropriate person to speak on behalf of the whole matter. And you can seek out their contact information in several ways to reaching out to your interviewee and stuff like that. But Julie, I actually have a question for you, and maybe you can give us a little bit of insight into this step. Can you maybe speak to your experience and what it is like chasing a lead and maybe developing a story out of nothing? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. You'd think I would know after doing this. I'm always on the mute. Yeah, that's one of the fun aspects, I think. I mean, that's really when your adrenaline starts to go and you've got that deadline and you want to try and get to the bottom of it. So yeah, really, it's just starting with trying to get as much information as you can. Social media can be a real tool, even if you look them up or creep them, for lack of a better term, to see if they happen to be on social media. You might be able to reach out to them through a DM, and often people are quite receptive because they're on their phones or their technology all the time. The old-fashioned phone book is also a way where if they happen to have a landline, you give them a call and see if they're willing to chat about it. Sometimes going to their home, if you were able to figure out where they live, could generate an interview, but it can also go the other way too. So you need to have a bit of a thick skin and be prepared for someone to tell you to take a hike. But I would say definitely do as much research as you can ahead of time. And if you have a name, you can go from there and scour social media and see if there's an opportunity to chat there.
Definitely. Does anyone have any questions about the whole process of conducting research? You can either type it in the chat or unmute yourself and speak. No? Okay. I mean, I guess that's a good good thing. That means it was understood, so we can move on to the next step. So after you've conducted your research, the next step, and figured out what you want to have your interview focused around, who you want to interview, the next thing is to send an invitation for the interview. And that means reaching out to the interviewee, or at least reaching out to, maybe not directly them, but someone who can direct you to them, put you in touch with them, because sometimes they're not necessarily the ones directly reaching out to you. For example, Queen's media releases, I reach out to Julie, and then she puts me in touch with the people to speak with, all the amazing experts that we've been able to have on our local news shows. So in terms of invitations, seek out the contact information, like we said, through the website, through social media, in whatever ways that you can. If you get any press release or a news article, sometimes there will be contact information available at the bottom, and you can contact either the person directly or the person who can direct you to your potential interviewee. A great way is to also seek out contact information through a website. So if you know that this person works for a specific organization, you can go onto their website. Maybe they'll have their email listed, which is a great way as well to reach out to them. And then you can let them know that that's how you found them. Or you can, like Julie said, you can also reach out to them directly on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I genuinely can't think of anything else, but those are kind of the main three ones, but that's also a great way and a very direct way of doing that as well. When you are doing your invitation, you want to introduce yourself, of course, and you want to identify with CFRC. This helps people know where you're coming from, and it also knows that this interviewee will not just be like, oh, who's this random person who wants to talk to me? They will know that someone from a reputable organization, a professional, established organization is reaching out, which just entails a lot more for sure. So you definitely want to introduce yourself, identify with CFRC. The next thing that you want to do in your invitation is contextualize why you want to interview them. You want to explain the purpose of why you chose to discuss whatever it is you are discussing with them, based on the topic, the event, the research, the project, whatever it is. And if you don't hear back, you can completely follow up once. You don't want to seem too pushy and, email them day after day if they're not responding to you. People are busy, but just remember that it's okay if they also decline your interview. Just remember to thank them in advance for considering. And it's also a good idea to leave the floor open, that if there is ever an opportunity in the future for something, that you would be more than happy to welcome them back at a different time, perhaps for a different topic. It's good to establish that you kind of want to maintain that professional relationship with them for future content, because that will also help you in developing really good programming and good content. So some things to always mention in your invitation, kind of just like a recap, is just, your name and that you're from CFRC, what topic or topics the interview will cover. And then what I personally like to do, and this is just like my tip, is to suggest at least 3 daytime blocks that work for you, just to limit unnecessary communication. So instead of agreeing and then deciding the time, and then that one time doesn't, it's not the most efficient process. So that's also a great thing to do. Julie, another question for you on this topic. Can you maybe speak to a time when maybe you were, relying on someone for an interview, maybe even a live broadcasted one, and let's say up? What are kind of some contingency plans that people can have on hand, just in case someone's not able to make a live interview and then you're stuck there on radio without someone and you're like, what do I do to fill the time?
Yes, well, that has happened. Excuse me. Doing a morning show, especially in the wintertime, lent itself to some unexpected cancellations if the snow was particularly heavy and people couldn't get out of their driveway. So sometimes we were left with maybe about 20 minutes notice that somebody was stuck on the highway or couldn't get out of their driveway. So we really had to shift gears quickly. So often what we try and do is have some kind of content ready to go, to put in its place that we would be able to fill the time with. So perhaps an evergreen story or an evergreen topic. Sometimes my co-host and I would take the time to talk about what, it was a morning show, so we tried to keep things light and encourage people to wake up and start their day. So sometimes we talk about what was trending on Twitter. Sometimes we would talk about the school bus cancellations or what has been announced as being canceled, kind of update our listeners and viewers on some of the top stories. That was a way that we would often fill the time. Just either have an evergreen story or have a topic ready to discuss or some information to share. For example, if you happen to have an interview tonight and they couldn't come for whatever reason, their technology was failing, they couldn't connect with you, this could be a good time potentially to talk about the guidelines that are now in place in Ontario and what it means to the university and what's going to be closed and what's going to be affected. That might be a time to at least fill 30 to 45 seconds with some news that your audience would be able to appreciate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. So we're going to do a little bit of an activity. So this is a fake invitation, and it says, "Hello, John Appleseed." Creative name. "I'm Alexandra. I want to interview about Bill 216. Would you be available sometime this week to do so? Let me know. I am available later this week on Thursday, anytime between 2 to 4 p.m. Best, Alex." My question for all you folks in attendance is, what is wrong with this email and how can we make it better and make it more formal to actually send off to John Appleseed? You can unmute yourself or you can type in the chat. Jackie said the person didn't suggest 3 date times. That is right. Yep. Yeah, Joel, they might not be available during that time.
Alex, who and what and who are you with?
Yes. Megan responded in the chat that you are from CFRC. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's also missing.
I also noticed that it doesn't actually elaborate. I want to interview about Bill 216. What aspects of Bill 216 and perhaps where you might have sourced the lead from. I saw in a media release or I heard through the grapevine somehow.
Yeah, exactly. How much of their time do I need? Yeah, that's a good point as well. How long the interview can be, for sure. Could say the second sentence a little bit more politely. Yes. Yeah, it does lack a little bit of professionalism, that's for sure. Those are answers.
Sorry, Alex.
No, I was going to say folks really hit the nail on that one, but yeah, continue, Julie, sorry.
I was just going to say, especially in this pandemic time, to explain how you want to do the interview. If it's going to be over the phone, if it's going to be a series of emails, questions, if it's going to be Zoom, Skype, FaceTime, give them an idea of sort of the technology that they might need. Mm-hmm. And also, if John Appleseed happens to be a professor or has some kind of title, I would probably not be as conversational as saying like, "Hey, John." I think I'd say, "Hi, Professor Appleseed, hope this email finds you well," although they have said that that's like everybody's saying that. But just kind of create that line and really stress the professionalism, because you could be reaching out to them for the first time and you're not familiar with who they are. So maybe just acknowledge their title and their position.
Definitely, that's a good point. But yeah, those are all really great points. So Instead of this, we want our email to look a little more something like this. So hello, John Appleseed. My name is Alexandra Fernandes, and I'm a volunteer for CFRC 101.9 FM. I recently saw the news release regarding Bill 216 as released by the FPC of the KFL&A region. I was wondering if you would be interested in an interview for my show to discuss this bill and what it means for schools in Kingston and Ontario. Please let me know if you are interested. I am available later this week, Wednesday from 3 to 5 p.m., Thursday from 1 to 3 p.m., Friday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Best regards, Alexandra Fernandes. So this is definitely a lot more of an improvement. You state your full name, where you're coming from, the fact where you got the information about, and 3 available times, and sentence about what it actually means. So yeah, that's kind of what you want it to look like a little bit. And like Julie said, if they have a title, be sure to keep that in mind when you're contacting them. Yeah. Any questions about that whatsoever? Okay, we can move on. So after you've sent out your invitation, you kind of have the next steps in which you're prepping your interviewee and where you're orienting your guest, and you want to make sure that you're preparing them for the interview. The most important thing is that your guest feels comfortable and that they don't feel anxious during this, because if they feel comfortable and well prepped, it just makes for a much better interview experience, not only for them, but also for you. So some ways that you can prep your interviewee, like Julie was mentioning, a lot of these are exactly what she mentioned, letting them know you can also send questions in advance so they know what to expect. Some people do ask for questions in advance. I've had that happen when I'm interviewing someone, especially when it comes to very heavy research-based interviews or something with important facts, especially because sometimes maybe something will slip someone's mind. They obviously don't want to give false information and things like that during an interview, accidentally say the wrong thing. So sometimes people may ask for questions in advance. So it is a good idea to have them prepared a day or two in advance, so you can always send them to your guest if requested. You also want to let them know if it's a pre-recorded or a live interview. And it's a good idea when you do let them know that it's, now typically, most of the time we are doing pre-recorded because of COVID and whatnot. So let them know, and then let them know also if it's virtual or in person. Of course, in-person interviews now with everything going on, not so much an option, so you don't really have to worry about that. But you can still get idea to let them know, you never know. And then you can also let them know when it will potentially air. Then you can always confirm just in case things get switched around. You never really know how things kind of go in the news cycle, and also when it will be podcasted. And you can also, you don't have to do this after you send the invitation. You can also do this beforehand. So you can always let them know that in the previous email, it'll be a pre-recorded live virtual. And then after you kind of figure it out, once they confirm, you can then send them the questions if they ask, or if they just like to have an idea of what you will be talking about. Julie, do you have any other ways in which you can maybe prep someone beforehand to make them more comfortable?
I think you've hit on most of them. Again, I think it's just letting them know what the format is going to be, what the general, what the overview of the questions is going to be, and just to let them know often it's just you and that person in the space. So just to make them feel comfortable, there's not going to be a huge audience. It's not in front of a stage, just like two friends chatting, to try and again put them at ease.
Mm-hmm. I think someone raised their hand to ask a question. I got a notification. You can hop in and do that.
Hi, Alexandra.
Hi, sorry, I did not see. Hi.
My name's Stefan, and I have a program called Nasha Kasha. I'm a volunteer at Radio Western, but my program is heard on CFRC, and it's a privilege to be in your midst on your menu. I just wanted to say that in terms of giving questions ahead, I do story-based programming, and I travel quite a bit when we're not repressed by COVID. And I just wanted to say that giving questions in advance is problematic. I find it far better and fair to the person who you're interviewing, because as you said, they are sometimes nervous. The best would be, I find, to give them signposts rather than questions. And they can actually include as much detail as you want, just don't put the question mark at the end, because it's also helpful to let them know that my job is to listen. So if you say something, I'll probably come up with a question that I can't foresee. So I can't give you all of the questions, but here are the signposts. That's all I want to say. But thank you. This is a most interesting discussion.
I would agree with that. I really wasn't someone who would give my list of questions ahead of time. I would give an overview of what we were going to be discussing, because often if you do present them with questions, there is that assumption that you're going to ask all of those questions. And sometimes they can get upset afterward. Well, you didn't ask me this. Well, you didn't ask me that. Well, you asked me this and it wasn't written down. And that's not the way a natural conversation progresses. You know, as you just said, like, it's all about listening and picking up on what they said and advancing that conversation. And when you're hemmed into a list of questions, it can be very confining. And often when you're listening, you get a better interview and you get better responses that way than going through the list of questions and trying to be so rigid.
Well said.
Mm-hmm.
I agree, but at the same time, as somebody who occasionally sends questions out in advance, I tend to do this for many of the academic researchers that I might be interviewing at Queen's University, especially where I'm talking about very difficult or dense topics that I don't have expertise and barely understand what the story is about either. I find it's very good to send those questions out in advance to sort of be able to, like, here's where the conversation I expect to go. But at the same time, while we steer in those directions, I always ask follow-ups and things that add to the conversation, picking up on things that they've said during that conversation. But no, I like the idea of having, you know, a natural flow to the conversation itself. But sometimes I find it helpful to also have the structure of where I want to go with the conversation ahead of time. What do you think?
I think certainly when it comes to the academic, you do want to focus them a little bit, because you only have so much time and you want to make sure that we're going to be really fleshing out a specific topic. But yeah, I mean, I'd say, you know, you'd have the questions for yourself and give them an idea, or the guidepost idea, but I wouldn't give too much away, just for fear that they would wonder why you didn't ask a certain question.
I like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. So we can move on to the next step. The next step is drafting your interview questions. So very on topic, obviously. And this is obviously a very important step because it's all about the chunk of the interview itself. And, you know, you want to make sure that you have a decent set of questions in advance to ask your guests, so that way you can guide the interview and be prepared. But you also, of course, want to make room for that conversation and that kind of like organic talk that you have with them. So the most important thing is to do your research. It's the most important pre-interview step, just to make sure that you really know who you're talking to. You don't want to go in there unprepared, not realizing the type of person and exactly who you're speaking with. This will help you in drafting the right questions and making sure that your interview has the right aim. So to draft questions, look at whatever is in the news or on social media about whatever you're talking about that event, project, situation, etc. See what the person has potentially also spoken to beforehand, even to get a better idea of their view and perspective on the matter. So if there's an article in another, let's say the Kingstonist or something, and this person has commented and there's a quote in there, have that on hand, kind of use that in a way to kind of help figure out where this person lies on the situation. And it gives you an idea of where they're coming from and how to steer the interview in that way. You can look up information of your guest on the website of the company they work for, or a biographical website, wherever you can find information about them. Maybe even on social media, there may be something. You can use that short description or whatever to help gain insight on your interviewee. You can also ask them for a short bio that you can use in your introduction, and that can give you some pointers as to where to look for more information. If they've also sent you a attached press release or a media release, read through it, which is very important to pose your questions around the details that are featured in that media release. In terms of questions as well, you want to kind of ease your interviewee into the weightier questions by starting with softball questions. You can always start off with a question in which they introduce themselves. So that way, not only you, but a personal connection with the interviewee. So, just before your intro, you can just be like, can you please introduce yourself for us? Or can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please? It establishes a personal connection, it loosens them up a little bit and gets them talking before jumping into the meat of the interview. You also want to remember to stay on topic by following the 5 W's and 1 H rule. So you want to make sure that your interview encompasses questions that kind of hit the who, what, where, why, when, and how. These are key elements, of course, to making sure that you have every piece of information to convey the news accurately to your listeners. So in terms of the interview process, I personally like to think of it in 3 different phases. I have it separated into your intro, your questions, and then your outro. So that's phase 1, 2, and 3. The intro is just really a step to get the ball rolling and ease your interviewee and your listeners into the whole interview. You don't really want to abruptly start firing hard-hitting questions at your guests because it can be a little bit overwhelming. So yeah, you can ask them to introduce themselves at this point. And kind of depending on the subject of the interview, you can then proceed to ask them, where their interest or passion or inspiration stemmed from, given the event or project or career path, research, album, whatever you may be talking about. So if you're speaking with a local musician, a good second question after the whole introduction could be, where did your love for music come from? Or why did you choose to pursue a career in this industry? It loosens them up a little bit, makes it a little bit more personal. And that's a great way to kind of segue into different questions with your interview, which is phase 2. And basically the questions that are fulfilling the purpose of your interview, whether that be, you're trying to give a local musician some more awareness, or you're trying to help them promote a new album or EP that they're releasing on the week or within the week or so, or if you're trying to highlight a charity event or fundraiser that is taking place in the region. And then you have phase 3, in which you're asking your guest if they have anything to add. It's always a good idea to do that. And we'll go into a little bit more detail about phase 3 in a little bit. And then you can recap your interview and thank them for sharing. So a little bit similar to your introduction, just so that way you're also easing your listeners out of the interview, and that way it doesn't just end abruptly and you're like, what is at the end of the conversation? Because that's also not fun. Julie, like, do you have any tips on how to conduct a successful interview or how to just come up with the right questions and stuff?
Well, I'd say to start, it's important to know your audience. So you want to think going into the interview, what is it that my listeners or my viewers are going to want to know from this person? What kind of information are they really needing the answer to? And that's a way that I base a lot of my interviews in terms of what is this going to mean to my listeners? What are they going to take away from this interview? And the 5 W's, definitely what I go for. You want the who, what, when, where, why, how. Those are the facts, how the information comes out. The other thing I would like to touch on is timing. Often timing is an issue, and many of us finish an interview and it's like, oh, I had so much more to ask you, or they said, oh, I could have said X, Y, and Z. So be mindful of the timing, because you don't want to take up 2 or 3 minutes on the intro when you could be allocating that time to asking them some questions and getting more into the meat of the situation. So, for my intro, often I would just say, John Small, a professor of biology here at Queen's University, joins us now to talk about the 30-year anniversary of the Acid Rain Treaty. Dr. Small, thanks so much for being here. And then they'd say, thanks so much. And then I'd say, okay, I'm just going to get right into it. It's been 3 decades since the Canadians and the US signed a treaty to try and put an end to the pollution in our lakes. And it would go from there. So that way I've really shortened the intro and really been able to get into the heart of the matter. And same with the extra. When they're done the conversation, you can say something like, if anyone wants more information on your research, or if anyone wants more information on the Acid Rain Treaty, you wrote an op-ed, it's featured in the Globe and Mail. We'll post the link at the bottom of the page, or we'll post the link on our website, something like that. And then thanks so much for your time. You want your intros and your extras to be fairly tight, so again, you can focus on that interview.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of another activity. So we have a media release. So we're actually going to split you folks off into randomized breakout rooms. And there's a document in the chat. If you scroll up a little bit, I'm sure that you can find it. It is a media release and you can download it. So what we're going to have
sorry, Alex, I have just added it again to the bottom of the chat, so make it easier.
Yeah, it's just titled Media Release, Let's Talk Education. So you folks can download it. And what we're going to do is separate you into breakout rooms on here on Zoom. And you're going to develop 5 open-ended questions that will encourage really interesting conversation to not only engage your guests, but also your listeners. So you can open up a Word document, draft some questions with your group, and then in 5-ish minutes, we'll all reconvene and discuss the sort of questions that we've all drafted based on that media release for our potential interview. So we're just gonna separate you folks into breakout rooms, and then we will come back and we'll invite you back, so you'll be automatically sent, but yeah. Oops. Oh my goodness. There we go.
All right, so for folks that might be listening on or visiting us via Facebook Live too, the Zoom participants are now in their breakout rooms, but perhaps we can also look at the document that they are looking at, Alex, so that way folks that are listening might even be able to have a look too. And that is the media release, and if they'd like to participate, they can also add some questions right into the Facebook chat if there's anybody there. In the meantime, I'd like to hear more, Alex, too, if you want to take this opportunity to talk about your work in news coordination that you've been at CFRC now for a couple of years. Let's hear more about some of the work that you've been doing, especially to inspire perhaps some of your peers who are also still students too. Let's hear more from you.
Yeah, for sure. Just had to double check I was not on mute. So yeah, I have been the community news coordinator since September, but I have been previously the SWEP student for news and arts coordinator at CFRC. So I started in May of 2019. So it has been almost 2 years of my time with the station, which is awesome. And clearly I love it so much since I've just kept doing it. So yeah, a lot of my job includes just being responsible for the local news programming that we do at CFRC, which is super exciting. We have so much going on in Kingston for a small town, exactly like what Julie was mentioning earlier. And it's really great to just be able to learn so much about the city during my time in my undergrad. So what I do is right now, in terms of our news programming at CFRC, we have 3 local news shows that I have been spearheading for the past little while. So we have a show called The Scoop, which airs every Monday at 4:30 p.m. and every Thursday at 11:30 a.m. And then we also have Today in YGK, another local news program that airs every Wednesday at 5 p.m. And those feature interviews with different folks from the Queens and Kingston community, people experts from Queen's University to discuss, either local or global news events. We also feature some really awesome directors for all the amazing different film festivals that we have. I've interviewed folks from SPAF, Skeleton Park Arts Festival, KCFF, the Kingston Canadian Film Festival, Real Out Film Festival, all these amazing organizations, just to give them exposure, give them more awareness, and just let Kingston folks and anyone who can really tune into CFRC across the world, just let them know what's going on on the local news programming that we do. We do these workshops as well, and we also do daily news briefs, which is super fun, and it's a great way to just plug in news updates for folks throughout the day. So those air every morning at 8 a.m. every weekday, and then every afternoon as well at 1 p.m. On the weekdays, which is super exciting. We have some really amazing volunteers who help contribute to that, as well as our student staff. So those are just some of the things that we do in terms of the news programming at the station. It's really exciting work. It kind of changes, and it is chaotic, but it's the good type of chaotic, in which you kind of get that, I think Julie was mentioning it earlier when she was talking about some of her work that she was doing, you kind of get this almost adrenaline rush, and it's very exciting, and it's also very helpful to just kind of be in the know, personally, because of all the information. My friends are always coming to me and they're like, everything about what's going on because you're so on top of it. And that's also just a great thing to be aware of, and a great skill to have, just being very personally aware of what's kind of going on around you. And that's such a amazing skill that I've been able to develop on top of so many other skills, like my communication, my confidence, my journalism skills, of course. I didn't really have much experience doing it before, but I've been able to really build my journalism skills over the last 2 years, and continuing to do so, which is really awesome. But yeah, we have a lot of news programming, and with the summer coming up, we're doing recruiting and for volunteers, for anyone who'd like to volunteer and contribute to news. So if there are folks interested, you can always reach out directly to CFRC, or you can reach out to myself as well. I'll put my email at the end of this workshop, and it is it's also just news@cfrc.ca. So it's pretty simple, and you can reach out to me if you ever want to get involved with news. It's not anything too vigorous. So please reach out. We'd love to have more volunteers. We're always looking for people to contribute. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and my role as community news coordinator at the station.
Thank you so much for sharing. All right, so we are going to try to get the folks that have been in the breakout rooms back into the shared space. And the countdown is on. Everybody should be populating in just a second.
Mm-hmm.
So Julie, while we're waiting for everybody to congregate back into the space, so how has it been trying to coordinate, regular news stories amidst all of the stories related to the pandemic this year? It must be intensely busy in your office.
It is busy, and I actually appreciate that, because when I made the decision to leave the broadcast journalism world, I was a bit worried that I was going to go from being super engaged and so many balls in the air to having a bit too much time and not knowing how to fill that time. But it's the complete opposite. I left broadcasting and came to Queens, and I still have multiple balls in the air, which makes for the days fly by. So really, it's still that time management skill of managing the pandemic aspect of the news cycle, and then also trying to tease out the good news stories, which abound on campus, whether it's the med students helping with the vaccine rollout in our community, or people donating to the United Way, or the researchers and what they're discovering. Dr. Ellis, who is a dermatologist, she's running a study on those who work in the healthcare field to see if they have any antibodies for COVID that could then provide some information to see if people can actually become immune to it, or how they can improve the vaccine. So it's really just staying on top of all the great stuff that's going on. And yes, lots of emails come through. We have lots of Teams meetings. We collaborate a lot to decide, almost triaging, deciding which one we'll do first and which one we'll be able to schedule at a certain time. So yeah, there's always something going on, which I love.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing and giving us some of those insights into the day-to-day in your office here at Queen's University. Back to you, Alex.
Yeah, so with the questions that you folks drafted, let's hear them. You can either type them in the chat or unmute yourself, and be sure to share them from your groups and whatnot.
Sylvia, how about anything from your group? What were some of the questions that you might have come up with?
Yeah, sure. For example, I was telling them that the first question that pops up to me is like, what happened that they decided to organize this event? That was one of it. And yep. Megan has another one.
Another question around what do they hope the outcomes, or what they hope they will achieve from the workshop, or yeah.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So what goals did they hope to achieve?
Yeah, or I think what do they want to get out of it? What is the outcome of the workshop, or impact that they're hoping to have in the school by doing the workshop?
Awesome. Ashley has written, what can we do in the community to prevent racism in Kingston? So that's drawing even past the workshop itself to a greater community conversation. I like that. Mm-hmm. What do you think, Julie?
I like that too. And that could be a question toward the end of the interview. Just what are you hoping this panel will achieve? And perhaps it is this greater conversation in terms of what to do with racism that exists in our community, or maybe they're hoping it will lead to more conversations. So I think that's a great question to ask. What are you hoping to get out of it? You've put all the effort in. What do you want to have happen?
Mm-hmm.
Dean has also asked, are there plans for future workshops or similar events? So extending from the workshop itself, what happens next? It's a great question.
Yeah, that's also a great question to also add, like near the end of the interview as well, like kind of tradition and, kind of give folks a new event or workshop to look forward to and to be intrigued by. Yeah. Anyone else?
I might be myself would like to learn a little bit more about who the speakers and panelists might be too. So give them a moment to spend some time introducing themselves, to contextualize their role within the organization and what they'll be doing with the event itself. But what is their area of expertise and or why are they so passionate about the particular topic that you're talking about at that time?
Definitely.
I think, can I speak?
Yes, of course.
I think I'd like to know going in some sense of what the problems specific to Kingston are. We seem to be acknowledging or stating, as everybody should know, there's this problem. And I know there's a problem North America wide, not only in the United States, but throughout Canada. But what is it specifically to Kingston that we need to focus in on? So my question would be, how would you characterize the problem specific to our area, this area that you want to talk about? That was a showstopper.
Are there any further questions that people have come up with that we haven't already thought of here?
Maybe a question about what we're getting right. A lot of these questions have to do potentially with negative, like there's racism, et cetera, but are we moving in the right direction? Perhaps some examples of initiatives that are in place to stop this or to educate.
And maybe if we can bring to the interview some statistics or something that we researched that could help as well.
Definitely.
Just to show them like we have these many cases here or something like that. So that could help and to build new questions, maybe.
I think I'd also like to tease out more on what inclusion and anti-racism are. What does that actually mean? Define the terms, but also spell it out what anti-racism and practicing anti-racism is on a day-to-day basis and what it means to be inclusive.
Yeah. Yeah, because that can definitely mean different things for different people, but having an idea of what they specifically mean and what those practices will look like as well. Yeah.
Okay, well, if I think folks have stopped with their questions, maybe we should move on.
Yeah, we can move on, definitely. So yeah, once you have those amazing questions that you've drafted, now it's a process of actually starting the interview, being on that Zoom call or, hopefully soon one day back in person, getting the ball rolling and whatnot. It is important to have a contextualized and detailed introduction, as we know now, to ease listeners. Abrupt, uncontextualized question and answer interviews can be really confusing sometimes for the radio listeners who may not understand, what they are listening to perhaps. And of course, the last thing we want is for our audience to be confused. So your introduction can just be a few sentences to introduce your guests and the purpose of the conversation. And once you've kind of contextualized what you will be talking about and you've introduced them, you can transition into your bigger questions. So you can let your guests kind of break the ice a little bit by creating that connection, easing them into the interview. And that also ensures that you have a nice flow throughout. So your introduction can sound a little bit something like, good morning, everybody. You're tuned in to the Daily News on CFRC 101.9 FM. I'm Alexandra Fernandes. Today, joining me in our studio, I have John Appleseed, who is here to chat with us about his music career and his new album that is being released this Friday, April 2nd. Please join me in welcoming John Appleseed to CFRC 101.9 FM. Hi, John. How are you doing today? And that's a good way to introduce it. It's conversational, it's friendly, it explains who you have, what you'll be talking about, and then you can just have a little bit of banter after that little thing. Once you ask about your day, you can talk about your day, the weather, what you're up to, that kind of thing, and then you can jump into your questions. So that's always a good way to start your interview, really short, 3 to 4 sentences, and it just makes it a little bit more energizing and bright. And once you're doing your interview, once you're kind of there and you're asking the questions that you've drafted and that you've come up with, this is an important step. And I know we talked about it a little bit earlier as well, but active listening. You really want to make sure that you're an active listener during the interview and that you're paying attention to your guest for several reasons. And it also helps the interview just sound a lot more engaging to someone who's listening. And it just sounds a lot more interesting. So listen very, very carefully to your guest and be ready to ask them follow-up questions. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to think of them on the spot, but also sometimes not, because typically follow-up questions are based on something that they've already said. You will have an idea of what you're looking for with your interview and in terms of the questions that you have drafted, but sometimes your guest can surprise you with new information and unexpected information, but you need to make sure that you are prepared to engage with it. If they bring up new information, the last thing you want to do is ignore it. And gloss over it as if they didn't even say anything, because not only is it a little bit rude, but you want to let them tell the story that they want to tell. Be sure to follow up with questions if they bring up something new, something maybe not even new, but just very engaging and interesting. And it's okay if you didn't understand something either. I know sometimes, I've been in an interview where my interviewee said something and I had genuinely no idea what they were talking about. But it's okay. You can just ask them to elaborate, ask them to speak a little bit more to that. And not only will you appreciate it, but your listeners will appreciate it too, because chances are they probably also may not be knowing what that person is saying. So yeah, allow them to tell the story they want to tell. That's also kind of the whole point why you brought them into the interview and onto the show. And once you've done that, you can then, and you should transition back to the planned questions that you already drafted, just to kind of get it back on track and fulfill the purpose of your interview. Some other ways to demonstrate active listening is to have a genuine interest with your tone and your gestures, your body language. Head nods every now and then are really good to show that you are paying attention to what they're saying, chiming in with a few words or like a sentence here and there to show that you're listening, and also eye contact. The thing with eye contact, though, is that now with interviews being virtual and whatnot, it is a little bit tricky, because when you're looking, let's say right now, like I'm looking at Julie, but it looks like I'm looking off into my camera, like I'm not actually looking at her. So that's kind of the tricky thing, but it's a good idea to glance between maybe the person on your screen and then the camera itself. That can help kind of maintain that engagement. Another thing is to not be distracted. Of course, turn your laptop and your phones on do not disturb and silent. You don't want to treat the interview like it's a task or a deadline that you have to get something done. You want to treat it like a conversation, because it essentially is one. And maintaining something that's engaging and lively and very organic and not fast is really good, because it puts them at ease and it creates a conversation that also sounds just that much better for your listeners. Does anyone have any questions about active listening? If not, we can continue to the almost last step. So after you've done your interview and you've asked all your heavy and important questions, you kind of want to do what you did in the beginning, similar to an outro. And similar to easing your audience into the interview, you want to ease them out of the interview as well, and not just your audience, but your guest. So that's kind of what this step is about. So once you finished asking all your questions, it's a really good idea to ask them if there's anything to add at the end. This gives them the opportunity to discuss something that you may not have had the chance to ask, or something that was not addressed. And they can also perhaps even elaborate a little bit on something that they mentioned earlier, which maybe you didn't follow up on, which could be helpful to them, to you, to your listeners. So yeah. Then you can end with a short recap of your interview, and you can summarize it for your listeners and anyone who may have maybe hopped onto the show late, for that matter. And then also a very good idea is to kind of do a little bit of a plug at the end of your interview, to plug the event, the project, ticket link, website, social media, whatever it is, to remind people who are interested how to actually get involved with this organization, with this event. So some ways that, once, let's say, you ask them, is there anything else you would like to add? And then they have their little spiel. Great way to end is just be like, well, thank you so much, John, for joining me on CFRC 101.9 FM today to discuss your music career and the album coming out this Friday, April 2nd. Folks, be sure to keep your eyes and ears open, because it sounds like it's going to be a great one. Thank you so much again, John. I hope you have a great day. You too. Thanks for having me. My pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Alexandra Fernandes. You're listening to the Daily News on CFRC 101.9 FM. So that's a simple way to end it. It's very similar to your introduction, but it's a good way to close off. It's friendly, it's nice, it's sweet. And then you can transition into the next show, or music, or whatever you choose to cut to. But yeah, once you've recorded up until this part, you're pretty good to go. You've successfully completed and conducted a full interview with the guest. The next steps really are just to, yes, no dead air. Very good point. That is the last thing we want as well. But yeah, the next steps are just to render your audio file and to do the editing process in whatever software you're using, to make sure that it's ready for deployment. Or if you're doing live, just having things ready to talk about, whether that's news updates, having a little bit of music for a little bit of a break. But yeah, does anyone have any questions about anything? No. Okay. And then we can move on to the last step, which is the follow-up. So even though you did finish your interview, you're not quite done yet. You still should follow up with your guests just to give them information about the interview and just the after logistics of the whole situation. So what you can do is you can mention to them, oops, my slides are a little bit messed up. You can mention to them when you plan to air the show. So give them the exact date and time, if it's going on Monday, 11:30, let's say, give them the show name. That's a good idea. It's also just good for networking connections. Most important, be sure to thank them for their time. That's very crucial, and you want to maintain that positive relationship and be gracious to them. And also let them know that if anything comes up in the future, that you would be interested in speaking with them again if the opportunity arises. So you can let them know that your emails are open and that they can reach out if they've ever liked to be featured. So, and follow-up email could look something like this. Hello, John. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me about your music career and upcoming album release. I plan to air this interview for Monday, April 5th at 11:30 a.m. on CFRC, but you can also listen online at the same time. It was great speaking with you. Take care. Your name. It's just a nice way to end off. But yeah, that is it. If there's any questions about anything whatsoever, about the news, anything, please feel free to jump in. We'll open the floor to questions for us staff as well as Julie. I think we did have a question from Jeff that was on Facebook. I've lost my chat feature, so I cannot find it.
So Alex, from Jeff on Facebook, he has asked for Julie and perhaps others too. In your opinion, is there a particular broadcaster or interviewer out there who you admire for their great skills and why? What is it about their technique that you also admire and perhaps maybe even learned from yourself?
Well, I would say one of the top interviewers that I still admire, and it came back to the forefront at the beginning of March, is Oprah Winfrey. I mean, she is a pro. She has the ability to be very conversational. She has humor, but she also is able to probe and get the answers. She's interviewed political leaders. She's interviewed royalty. She's interviewed rock stars. She's interviewed just about everyone. You know, her abilities are so vast, and we haven't seen much of her in a while, but certainly when she did that interview with Prince Harry and Meghan, it just came back. I was like, oh, you're good. You're more different. I also really like Savannah Guthrie, who does the morning show for NBC. I was so impressed with her ability to hold court during the presidential debates. If anybody watched any of those debates, it was a circus, but she was really able to get, Donald Trump to stop talking, and he wasn't afraid to cut him off and let Joe Biden speak. And I thought she did a really great job moderating that debate. And I've seen other interviews with her, and I really like her style. Canadian-wise, I do think Lisa Laflamme, who works for CTV National News, does a really nice job. And when Peter Mansbridge, I'm dating myself a bit, but when Peter Mansbridge was on the air, I really enjoyed Peter Mansbridge's interviews as well. And I might just add, that is one way to make yourself a better interviewer, is if there is someone you admire, you like the way they do their interview, it's a certain genre and they just get to the bottom of it. Watch their interviews. So much of it is up on YouTube, or you can follow them and they post things all the time, and learn from them. Take a look at the cues, look at their questions, look at how they intro something, look at how they extro something, look at how they're able to transition from one topic to another, or to tackle a difficult interview or a difficult conversation. I learned so much by watching other people do interviews. So if there's someone you really are fond of, study them and emulate them.
Does anyone else have any questions for Julie or myself or anything that we've discussed this evening?
What about demonstrating, like even just your own tone and body language, and demonstrating empathy or sensitivity to what people are saying, but also still maintaining, you know, an unbiased approach to the interview itself? How do you show that you are caring about what the person is saying without, you know, taking on their opinion necessarily?
Well, I'd say what Alexandra said really holds true. Just the eye contact, the head nods on occasion, just keeping that open body language, not crossing your arms, not fidgeting, just really being engaged. And I think we've all been in situations where we've been involved in conversations where we may not have agreed with the other person's point of view, but you need to be gracious. You need to acknowledge the fact that they have another opinion. It may not be yours, but it's not necessarily your place to say they're wrong. You invited them on, you're listening to them. You can play devil's advocate and ask them some questions, but I'd say you need to remain neutral. Now, some broadcasters don't. Some broadcasters obviously have I guess on this, what spectrum they're on, whether they're right wing or they're left wing or they're center. But I'd say certainly you need to make the eye contact. You need to do the social cues in order just to show that you're acknowledging them and you appreciate their time. And I know that's hard on radio. Like I'm speaking from a television or a podcast perspective, like a visual one. Certainly with radio, those slight or good point, or just something to acknowledge the comments that they're making.
Thank you so much.
Anyone else?
I have a question for Julie. Julie, I'm not traveling now, so this isn't going to happen, but I do a show about Ukrainian life and Ukrainian issues for everyone, hopefully, that they're interested as well. If I were to come on campus, and next week is the 35th anniversary of the Chernobyl accident, big story, and I were to, in advance, ask for a poli-sci prof for an interview in person. I like to do my sound gathering in person. It has a different quality, and the stories have a different quality. Do I need to tell you, the public affairs person, that I'm coming on campus? It's not a high school. It's not a grade school where obviously you have to report to the office.
Yes, it is always preferred that you do let the media relations person know that you're coming on campus, because there is campus security who could be wondering what you're up to. So we could certainly give them the heads up and say, hey, this is going on, and they're interviewing a poli-sci professor. Don't worry about it. Of course, you're on the sidewalk. It's public space, but it's just sort of a courtesy to give them the heads up so they're not wondering what you're up to.
Okay, is that it for questions?
I think so. I don't see anything in the chat, but if that is it for questions, we can end off. Folks, if you're not already, just please, little plug, be sure to follow us on social media. We're at CFRC Radio. You can keep up with us, all of our awesome programming, and news about, our events and stuff. And also, if you're not an official volunteer for CFRC and you would like to, please apply to volunteer. You can do that by going to our website, just cfrc.ca, and then you can find the volunteer page, and you can apply, or you can also just directly email myself if you'd like to get involved with our news collective. you can reach me at this email, news@cfrc.ca. So yeah, and if there's any questions that of course come up, you can email us, message us on Facebook, Instagram, and we can help you out with that. But thank you so much, everyone, for attending our workshop. We're really glad that we were able to do this. Thank you so much, Julie, for making the time to share with us about your career, your progress through the industry, and just jumping in with some really good advice in terms of interviewing and things like that. So yeah, thank you so much. And again, thank you to the Community Radio Fund of Canada, in which we were able to make this workshop possible.
Thank you to all of you for your interest, some really great questions, and it's just nice to hear from those of you who share the same passion as I do. So it's so important. Journalism is so important, especially in these times. So thank you, and keep up the good work.
Thank you
Julie.
so much. Thank you, everyone, again. Have a good rest of your evening.
All right.